Welcome to Talk with Our Borders. I'm your host, John Petit. I know it's been a minute, life got busy and I took a short break from recording, but I've missed these conversations and I'm excited to be back in full swing. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Paul Schonenberg, a man whose path took him from the Pentagon all the way to the quiet streets of Luxembourg. We talked about what brought him here, how his military background shaped his civilian life, and why he believes international voices need more space in Luxembourg's national conversation. We also got into culture clashes, education challenges for expat families, and what it really means to integrate, not just administratively, but also socially. I think it's an honest, thoughtful conversation about identity, leadership, and building bridges in a small but complex country. So, without further ado, enjoy the conversation with Paul Schonenberg. Hello, Paul. Welcome to my podcast.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I was going through your personal journey and I found it quite interesting because, to my understanding, you had an extensive career in the military. You worked for NATO. And then at some point, you landed in Luxembourg. So how did that go? What happened in your life that you came from the Pentagon, the United States, and you ended up in this tiny little country of Luxembourg?
Well, I was at the Pentagon, and I was the branch chief for security assistance policy, which meant that I was responsible for all of the logistics support for all of the American Air Force related planes and equipment which were in the hands and being used by our allies and friends. Mm-hmm. And I had been there successfully for several years, and it actually made good sense as a next assignment, having had that experience, to transfer to the NATO Maintenance and Supply Agency, which is responsible for the logistic support of NATO. Mm-hmm. Quite a lot of which is done using American equipment, some Air Force equipment. So coming to Luxembourg was an easy fit for me to come to NATO in Luxembourg, and a continuation really of the experience and the background I had as an Air Force guy at the Pentagon.
So you worked for Clearstream in Luxembourg, right? So you didn't really start off as the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce in Luxembourg, right? So how did that process go that you eventually ended up at AmCham?
Well, the transition was, first I came as a U.S. Air Force guy in uniform to Luxembourg. Mm-hmm. And anecdotally, I will add that the house that I moved into was right next to Prime Minister Juncker. Although at the time, Prime Minister Juncker was Minister of Finance Juncker. But he was one of the first Luxembourgers that I ever met in Luxembourg, which was kind of interesting. So,
did you know who he was when you moved there?
I had no idea. I had a job where I was supposed to do a certain bit of training, of entertaining. So mm-hmm. It made sense for me to have a place that was big enough so that I could do a little bit of entertaining. And this is the house I ended up with. And mm-hmm. It was literally right next to Mr. Juncker's house. So that really worked out great. Certainly not going to say that I'm his best friend, but we've known each other for quite some time, and to the best of my knowledge, it's always been on very friendly terms. But my sequence was, I came to NATO as a U.S. guy fulfilling a responsibility for the United States. Mm-hmm. And then when I retired from the Air Force, I retired with U.S. sponsorship to become a NATO civil servant, equivalent to a brigadier general, which was kind of cool. And that was being responsible for wholesale logistics support for the NATO AWACS program, which mm-hmm. was a very good fit for me because I had NATO AWACS experience since I was the Air Force guy who brought AWACS aircraft into Iceland. I really knew that weapon system pretty well. So that was a good fit. Mm-hmm. And then when I finished that assignment and stepped down as the head of NATO AWACS, I had decided that I wanted to continue to stay in Luxembourg. But then the issue is, okay, I'm an Air Force guy. What can I do to get a decent job and to stay in Luxembourg? I don't really know much of anything other than personal finances, but I wasn't a good fit for the financial sector based on background. Mm-hmm. But I thought about it and I said, well, I've had a very successful Air Force senior officer career. I've hired a lot of people. I've fired a lot of people. I've helped them be the best that they can be. I've run organizations that have run awards for being really, really great. I have I have a master's degree in counseling psychology, a master's degree in management, and a PhD in organizational leadership. Pretty good education too. And I said, you put all of that together, and if you think about it, that sounds like the skill set for a senior HR director.
Right? Yeah, true. Yeah.
So what I did was there's a thing called the transferable skill set CV, where you say, okay, you're looking for somebody who can do X, and these are the skills you're looking for, and this is my proof that I have those skills. So that's what I did. I made up a skill set CV that was packaged like that and sent it to Clearstream because I wanted to work for someplace that was English speaking, but international. And they were happy to have me. They were more than happy to have me. They thought that my skill set was a perfect fit. They even said to me after they hired me, they said, "Where were you? We've been looking for somebody like you." And but I sent them the CV cold, and very quickly got an interview, and it was a very good fit. And then I was very happy to go ahead and work there.
Do you think that your military background helps you in that position, or helped you in that position, or even now so?
To be honest, I think having a military skill set is an excellent skill set for anybody doing anything.
Could you elaborate? Because I think there's an interesting point here, because the European mentality, they don't really have the same relation to their military. Because I lived in the US for a very long time, so I know that there's a great appreciation for the military. So maybe you can explain that a little bit for the audience if they're not aware.
Yeah, Americans are very patriotic. And I'm not going to say that Luxembourgs are not loyal to their country. They are, and they love their country. But Americans are very patriotic, and historically, the military has been respected and an important place. And for a lot of young American men and women, the military is a place where they can grow up and they can find themselves, and they can kind of decide who they are and what they want to do and get experience, and then use it in the rest of their lives, and do so with many fond memories and with good appreciation. So American employers appreciate people with a military background, which is generally associated with hardworking, problem-solving ability, thinking out of the box, being innovative, which I think are all the things that we want to see now in modern companies to go ahead and find solutions and move forward.
Maybe even handling pressure, I would assume, is also probably a big part.
I would say that that's definitely true. I find that background has been very helpful to me personally to find myself and to be who I am. But it also has helped me as a leader, running things and making decisions and helping other people to go ahead and grow and develop too. I will admit that I'm a tough leader when it comes to going ahead and doing that, but I also would like to believe that I'm a tough leader with heart.
Right. When you came here, and I want you to be honest with me, to Luxembourg, was that a culture shock for you? Did you have difficulties adapting? Was there something, or did you fit in like a glove right away and it was a perfect fit off the bat?
When I first got here, I loved Luxembourg for being beautiful.
In what sense?
In all senses. I mean, this is a stunningly beautiful country. I like forests. I like trees. You know, I come from New York and New England, if you will. And New York and New England have a fairly similar climate to Luxembourg. A bit cold and damp and rainy a bit in the winter, and a bit sunny. And there are a lot of forests throughout New York State. And New York City has this gorgeous big Central Park, which is a huge forest. So geographically, in terms of the environment that I was living in, it was kind of similar. When I think back on first arriving in Luxembourg, kind of the joke that comes to mind is that, and it's a bit of a stretch, but it's a metaphor, if you will, is that, there are still a lot of horses on the streets.
It's like we're still stuck in the past, or is that?
Compared to, I came from Washington, D.C. on a plane and directly landed landed in Luxembourg, and a little bit of a different regard. But more specifically, in that sense, things were really quiet on Sundays.
Oh yeah, yeah. They still are. They still are.
On Sundays when I first got here, there were no stores open to go. I'm used to go, Sunday, it's another day to go shopping and go to the movies and do this and do that. When I came to Luxembourg almost 30 years ago, there were no movie theaters open on Sundays. There were no grocery stores open on Sundays. There were a couple of restaurants that you can go to after church on Sunday, but other than that, Sunday was pretty sleepy.
I mean, there's a saying, and I think that is quite true, that Americans, they live to work, and Europeans work to live. So I think it's a little bit of a reflection, maybe in that sense, that Europeans tend to see work less of a commitment and more of a, okay, we're going to work so we can enjoy, whereas the Americans always tend to work more. That's at least that's my observation from being in the US for 7 years and living here for the others.
I mean, there are also some very hardworking Luxembourgers
Oh yeah,
that
no,
I know
sure,
and
sure,
appreciate as
sure.
well too. But I would say, as a general rule, yeah, Americans a little bit more tend to take their identity out of their titles from work,
Yeah.
and their friendships many times are colleagues from work, and they maybe spend a little bit more time in the office as well as coming and going in from office. In the United States, having an hour's drive to go to work and an hour's drive to come home from work at the end of the day is not at all unusual.
Yeah.
In Luxembourg, when I first arrived here, if you had more than a 15-minute commute to go to work, people would be complaining about it.
Complaining. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So yeah, I think that there's a little bit of a difference in that regard. But still, Luxembourgers are amazing people, and I really cherish the friendships I have with Luxembourg. But I will tell you one thing about my relationship with Luxembourgers.
Please do.
So Luxembourgers I've always found them to be warm and friendly and approaching and everything else like that. But not necessarily do you immediately get past the front door.
Meaning what?
Well, you meet people and your friends and you speak to them outside and this, that, and another thing. But my background experience has been that Americans form deeper friendships quicker.
Got you. Okay. Now I understand what you mean.
And I have to say that about the time that I ended up being in Luxembourg for 10 years, I suddenly found that from the Luxembourgish people that I knew and was acquainted with, suddenly I ended up getting invited to a lot more things. And
I see.
kind of
Okay.
jokingly, I ended up finally making it into the kitchen and sitting around the kitchen table. Not that we weren't already friends, but the involvement suddenly seemed to accelerate.
So you're saying it takes longer. It takes longer for Luxembourg to warm up to strangers, I guess, in
Yeah.
a sense.
And I'm not going to say we weren't good friends and we didn't see each other and didn't have a good time and everything else like that, but it wasn't the same intimacy of friendship that I was perhaps used to from my Luxembourgish friends. So I asked some of my Luxembourgish friends, I said, hey, if you don't mind, can you tell me what's going on? Because all of a sudden, it seems like the doors have opened and I'm in much richer friendships than I had been originally. You've always been nice to me and I've always appreciated, but gotta admit, seems a whole lot more close and strong and enjoying the barbecue a little bit better and whatever. What's going on? What happened? And my Luxembourgish friend says, well, to be honest with you, when we first met you, we thought you were kind of cool and kind of interesting. And so, we had a friendship with you. But it's also true that in our friendships that we have had with other Americans over time, our feelings have gotten hurt on occasion because we've had circumstances where we were friends with an American. We thought we were doing good. And then all of a sudden one day they said, oh, by the way, next week I'm moving to Chicago. I'll send you a Christmas card. It's been fun. But now I'm packing and we're going to go. And they said, we're used to having deeper friendships. And in a lot of cases, we met our best friend in our second day at school. We like deep friendships. And so this peripheral friendship stuff that some American, or seems to be a lot of friends, but not the same degree of depth. They said that was kind of new to us, and we got our feelings hurt a couple of times. So you
Hmm.
seemed like you were a good guy, but we wanted to wait and see if you were going to stay.
It's actually something I encounter quite a lot because the Americans are quite good at talking, small talk, building connections, networking, and I think Europeans. And I always use the example when you go into an elevator in the U.S. People will ask you, "Hey, how are you doing? How's your day?" And if you try that in Luxembourg and you don't know the person, that person will look at you and think like, what is why are you talking to me? I don't know you, right? So I think the point is that I think we probably have to warm up to the person, get to know the person, see, is that a good fit? Do we vibe with them? I think so. I think we have a little harder time connecting with people, you know being that I grew up here, so I have a little bit of a background.
No,
So.
I certainly agree, and I think that that's true. And I've always enjoyed, even from the first days, I've always enjoyed the friends and acquaintances that I've made in Luxembourg. But I seriously noticed, to the point where it was obvious to me, even with my thick head, that wait a second, something's going on here. What's the deal? And it happened about the 10-year point.
Hmm.
Maybe for somebody else it happens at the 7-year point. But I do think that that's kind of a Luxembourgish characteristic. And I will say that I have some of the friendships that I have in Luxembourg, with Luxembourgers particularly, are stronger friendships than maybe the lot of friends and superficial friendship kind of deal. So there is a cultural difference in that regard. But I'm glad that I was worthy to make it to the cut and to be
You
employed.
proved them. You proved them wrong in a good sense. So that's
Yeah,
good.
and as a result,
Yeah.
as an end result, 30 years, I'm still here, and now I have dual citizenship. I'm both a Luxembourger as well as an American. So
Yeah, it feels the same
I
way
can't
actually.
say that I speak Luxembourgish terribly well, but my
Hmm.
excuse for that is that all my Luxembourgish friends prefer practicing their English with me
Yeah,
than
that's
letting me
good. Yeah.
practice my Luxembourgish with them.
Right, right. That's true. Let me pivot to your role as CEO and chairman of AmCham. So, what is your day to day life look like? What are your responsibilities? What are your main duties as a chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce?
Well, in simple terms, I think my duties are to keep AmCham alive and well, to keep the
Hmm.
members happy, and to use the vehicle to make a difference in support of our membership. So then you
Hmm.
say, okay, well, who are your membership? Well, when I first joined AmCham, so I wasn't the original founder, but when I joined AmCham after I had been sitting at Clearstream for 3 days. So I'm
Okay.
sitting at Clearstream for 3 days. I figured out how to use my computer. And then I think to myself, hey, wait a second. You're now making a transition from military life and a military career to civilian business life. You've managed to take a transition and you've got this great HR job for this wonderful company. Now, you know, you're being ridiculously successful. And if you're successful, you should give something back. So I think maybe you ought to look around and see if you can find some nonprofit organization that you can volunteer to help. And maybe you can use that volunteer organization to help you make friends outside of work and to get to know other people. And that'll help you with your transitioning from military life into civilian life. I love military people, but my goal in staying in Luxembourg was to go ahead and to become embedded in the broader civilian community and make friends. So based
Hmm.
on that, I looked around and I found out that there was a 3-year-old American Chamber of Commerce. So I wrote a letter and sent it to him saying, hi, my name is Paul Schonenberg. I'm a retired military guy. I'm working as an HR director at Clearstream, and this is my CV and my background. And I'd love to be a volunteer and help out. I'm not looking to be king. I don't want anybody kissing my ring. I don't want to be the boss. I'm happy to go ahead and help clean up at the end of an event, happy to fold chairs and open them up and set up for an event. I'm happy to do whatever you want. I'm divorced, don't have any kids. If I can be an asset to the organization, it will be my pleasure.
Hmm.
And then the joke that we all collectively use a little bit is that's what I did, that I helped and set up chairs and did this and did that project. And that as it ended up that, at the end of the year, that I had done such a bad job that they elected me to be the chairman.
Oh, yeah, very bad, yeah.
And then every 5 years, I've been reelected to go ahead and be the chairman. So it's not my organization, it's the member organization. But, every 5 years they've been electing me. So now I've been the AmCham chairman for 24 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the longest serving AmCham chairman in Europe. And I now being a little bit older, and I have to say that I'm thrilled to pieces to still have this opportunity to serve and to be involved within an organization trying to help the members and trying to help make a difference. So then the question is, okay, what does AmCham do? Well, we're originally an organization. When I joined AmCham, there were 30 member companies, and they all were American companies.
So the companies, so you work with the companies basically on a daily basis?
Yeah, the membership of AmCham is primarily companies.
Okay.
At a certain point in time, we said, okay, for corporate social responsibility, we should allow students to join for a small fee if students are interested in getting to know more about the business world. And we should let seniors, retirees who are finishing their career, if they still want to be a little bit active involved, we should let them join AmCham too. And if there is some micro company that needs to network a little bit and get to meet people, we should help them out by giving them a low-cost membership. So we do have membership for students and for seniors and for micro companies. But the core of AmCham membership is small businesses, and even more so, it's corporate members that have more than 10 employees. And then, of course, we're very proud and honored that we have a certain number of charter members who are bigger and substantial companies that have deeper pockets and can help us do what we want. So that's our membership base. Now, again, when we started out, the membership was 100% American. It wasn't necessarily a requirement that you have an American passport, but 100% of the companies that were involved were all purely American companies. And at a certain point in time after I joined, I went to the board and I said, okay, I think I figured out a little bit what you want to do and how you do that, and I'd maybe like to suggest we change a little bit. And they said, okay, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I think that you're interested in 4 things. I think you're interested in networking, to get to know each other and to get to know other people that you should know. And I think you want to do your networking in English because Americans aren't noted for being really good in other languages. So I think you want to have a networking organization that gets together and does stuff periodically and does it in English. I think we should a little bit focus, because it seems to me from seeing what you're doing, you're spending a reasonable amount of time figuring out how to do things in Luxembourg, how to make things work, how to get things done. Who do you talk to about what? Who do you avoid talking to like the plague? Who do you work with? Who do you not work with to get things done, to be successful, to make money?
That's a navigation guide.
Yeah. And then I think the third thing that you think about is problem solving. It's like, oh, well, we have this problem. Well, the government policy is to do it this way. Yeah, but we don't like that for this reason. Is there some way that we can find a better solution? And of course, that brings us to the last point, which is engaging with the government, talking to the government, explaining what the membership wants and why they want it, and going ahead and getting that done. And I said, so I think those are the 4 pillars that we're kind of built on. And I suggest that if we want to have kind of a charter of what we're going to do, those should be the 4 pillars. And they said, yeah, good idea. I said, all right, now here's the next thing. The last point in there is the lobbying with the government bit. And I said, now I understand that when you guys go to the government, sometimes you might always want to be on good behavior and only say nice things. And occasionally when you have a problem, you're not so sure that you want your company's brand associated with going to the government and complaining. So it may be the case that one of the reasons why you've hired me is that you want an old army officer that you can send off to the government to go ahead and carry the water and be doing the complaining a little bit. And that's okay with me. I've got a decent income. I'm a little bit more senior and established, and I don't have a company reputation necessarily to protect. I do have AmCham's reputation to protect. I tell you what, I'm perfectly happy to be the guy who goes to the government and argues, complains, cajoles, tries to make a deal when it's necessary to do that. But I think we ought to be very clear that our approach is that we will never, ever, under any circumstances, publicly criticize the government. I just don't think that that's smart.
So you do it internally, but not publicly.
Well, I think when we go to see the government, we should be very honest and very straight and tell them what we want and why, and tell them how that's in Luxembourg's best interest to help us out. Not asking for favors, because favors don't really do any good, but going to them and say, hey, we're here to make money and to pay taxes, and we're having a little difficulty making money and paying taxes because of this. If you change this a little bit, we could make more money and we could pay you more taxes. Let's make it a win-win deal kind of deal. So I said, I think we ought to do things that way. And I'm willing to be the guy to go to the government to talk and to see if we can go ahead and do that. So I think that that's our approach. And they said, oh, great, that's our approach. I said, well, not done yet. And they said, well, what else? And I said, well, right now, if I go to the government on behalf of 30 companies, even if the 30 companies happen to be American companies, which are pretty well treated in Luxembourg, I think I'm going to be invited in to have a cup of tea, but I'm sure not going to be invited to stay for lunch because it's too small a crowd. I think we need to get ourselves bigger, and I think we need to do some stuff to show that we're here to help. So let me explain that. So I said, what do you mean? And I said, well, we're an English-speaking American crowd, and that's good. But there aren't enough English-speaking Americans and English-speaking American companies to get us big enough so that if I go to the government, they're happy to give me lunch. We're just not. There aren't many, and they're not really good and powerful and strong companies. And if another one shows up, I'm happy to go to them and talk to them to join.
You just don't have enough numbers.
But there's still not the numbers that we need to have. However, there are a lot of international companies in Luxembourg. And there are a decent number of Luxembourgish companies that also are interested in doing business with international companies that speak English. And I bet if we go to these international companies that are here and say, hey, we're an English-speaking business organization, and, we are looking for other friends and allies that we can do business with, and we really don't care what your passport is. We care if you're a good, honest, capitalist, English-speaking group of people, and you're interested in these same four things that we decided we're interested in doing. I said, I bet if we go to those companies and say, hey, we won't treat you like second-class citizens if you want to join us. We'll treat you like we treat everybody else. And our existing members. You don't have to have an American passport to be part of our game. I said, I bet there might be a reasonable number of companies say, oh, that's cool. Yeah, and we'd like to be associated with you guys. And yeah, let's do it together.
Let me just see if I understood this correctly. So you started out just having American nationals or people with American passport, but you extended your membership criteria now that you also include people that are English speaking. Is that correct, or did I understand that wrong?
Basically, that's it. So over years, the demographics of AmCham have shifted from being 100% American, so that now 30% of our membership is hardcore American. By passport, an American company that the name, and if you go back to America and get off the plane, you'll see them up on the billboard. Hardcore American. That's 30% of our membership is hardcore American. 20% is Luxembourgish. Now, that's Cargo Lux, that's Luxair, that's ArcelorMittal, that's also all the big law firms. That's also the big four, Arndt and Medenock, DuPont. DuPont is manufacturing, but PwC, Ernst & Young.
Yeah, I was going to say the Deloitte, EY, for the accounting firms. Yeah.
So that's 20% is Luxembourgish and those, and then the other 50% is from all over the world. but people who happen to be in Luxembourg, they're expats, they're newcomers in Luxembourg, so they do need to figure out how the ecosystem works. And they do need to figure out how to get things, and they're interested in problem solving, and they're interested in lobbying with the government. So 50% of our membership is all over the planet. I'm very proud that Bank of China is a member of the American Chamber of Commerce. So we have turned ourselves into a melting pot organization that's business focused, mostly on the international companies, but we do have small businesses and startups and everybody else, and we only function in English. And that seems to be a good fit for us. And on that basis, we have grown to be 400 companies. So we've gone from 30 companies to 400 companies, and now
You have the numbers now.
We're the biggest private chamber of commerce in the country, and our mandate is to support our members, and our members are decent taxpayers and good members who are supporting the government and helping to pay taxes and everything else. And we then view that we have the mandate to help them solve their problems and to deal with the Luxembourg government to help. And over the years, we've been pretty successful doing that.
So, since you've been living in Luxembourg for such a long time and you're very connected, you have a really big network, especially with expats. So I think you're quite qualified to say, what is the situation like for expats right now in Luxembourg? What do you like? What maybe you think could be improved upon?
First off, I think Luxembourg is great. And I think people who have an opportunity to live and work here are really fortunate in Luxembourg. It's a beautiful country, particularly if you're into health fitness and you like jogging, you like bicycling, you like walking in the countryside and stuff like that. This isn't any better. Now, I will admit that we joke a little bit and we say the north of the country is a little bit empty. And sometimes we kind of joke a little bit and we say, in the north of the country, if we could dig up some of that pasture farmland and pile it up and make a mountain that we could ski on in the winter, that would be cool.
Right. Yeah. It would add something to the country.
And by the same token, if we piled all that dirt up a little bit higher to make the mountain that we can ski on in the winter, then it would leave a hole that we could fill with water that we could go water skiing on in the summer.
Right, perfect. We have everything.
So, I will admit that I will joke about that a little bit, even though I like the north of the country too now as well. So
it's a little more quiet, yes.
So it's a beautiful country. Is it a little bit sleepy compared to London, Paris, New York? Yeah, it's a little bit sleepy.
I don't think you can compare, actually.
I don't think we can compare.
Yeah.
But the richness is here, and I am hyper busy, and I am never at a loss for things to do and places to go and everything else like that. So there's more than enough to do to keep busy. You may have to look a little bit and be a little bit focused on figuring it out, but there's anybody who says, Luxembourg is totally boring. My reaction to that is, well, you didn't get out and you didn't look hard enough, because there sure as heck is enough stuff to go ahead and do here. And just get out of the house and go look and put your hand out and shake hands and be brave and make it happen. So I certainly think that. Now, are there some problem areas? Well, I would prefer to say that there are challenges a little bit, and some of them we've worked on. The biggest challenge for a lot of people is you come to Luxembourg, and many of the foreigners who come to Luxembourg are more senior expats who have gone to school someplace else, and they've had their first number of jobs, and they've developed experience and capabilities that make them attractive to be recruited to Luxembourg. So they come to Luxembourg mid-career-ish. And if they're coming to Luxembourg mid-career-ish, they may come with a partner.
Sure.
Because that's what a lot of us do, is we get married and we have a partner of whichever, either same sex or opposite sex, but we have a partner and we have someone that we like hanging out with that way. And many times we come to Luxembourg and not only do we have a partner, but we have kids too, because that's kind of the output if you have partners sometimes. I'm not criticizing the Luxembourg schools. I think that they're good, and I think their intended purpose primarily is to help Luxembourgish kids historically to survive in the ecosystem, which is an ecosystem of the Grand region, which is Francophone, Luxembourgish, and German. So that's what the Luxembourgish schools teach, which is fine for local Luxembourgers. But if you're bringing a 14-year-old boy here from Chicago, or 15-year-old girl from Japan, they're not going to come here knowing how to speak German, French, and Luxembourgish. And for some of the kids, the barrier for entry is too high in the Luxembourgish schools. That's not a criticism of the Luxembourgish schools. It's saying these people are coming at a certain age. I tell people, if you get here and you have young kids, you have really young kids, or they're just entering school, put them in the Luxembourgish schools. They'll immediately learn how to speak 3 languages, and that's fabulous. But if you come here with a teenager, and particularly teenagers who are getting close to starting to think about where they're going to go to university, it's too much heavy lifting for them to be able to quickly enough learn to speak 3 languages like you do in the Luxembourgish schools.
There are international schools in Luxembourg, right? Are they not equipped for the number of people that come here? Or?
Well, there are 2 issues. The first issue is capacity, and the second issue is cost. So my first point is I love the Luxembourgish schools, and I think it's great if people put their young kids in Luxembourgish schools. But for older kids, I think it's too much of a barrier. And then we need the international, or historically we've needed the international school. Now, by the way, I will tell you that I think the Athénée, which is a purely Luxembourgish school, which is now opening sections in English, is unbelievably good. And if you can get your kid accepted to go to the Athénée, I think you should do it. So I'm a big fan of the Athénée. It's a brilliant Luxembourgish school, and I'm delighted that they have an English-speaking section at a certain point in time. And it's no cost, it's free, and do it. Okay, but there's not enough space in the Athénée and capacity to go ahead and handle all the English-speaking kids who happen to be here. So then what are the choices? Well, when I first got here, the choice was the American International School, which now has gradually become just the International School, which is great. But the tuition costs a lot of money. So I will admit that one of the things AmCham did at a certain point in time, and we did it with Henri Gretton, who was the Minister of Economy at the time. I went to see Mr. Gretton, and I said, Mr. Gretton, you're interested in more international companies coming to Luxembourg, right? And he said, yeah, I am. And I said, well, listen, I need to tell you that we got a problem. If we're going to have more international people coming to Luxembourg and setting up companies and everything else like that, it's too heavy lifting to have their parents paying the private school tuition of 15,000 euros a year or something or other at the international school. That's a lot of money. And the companies are less willing to go ahead and pay that bill as time goes on because they want to treat everybody fairly. And here's someone who has no kids, and then here's somebody else and they have 3 kids, and 3 times tuition of 15,000 for going to the international school or some sort of private school. That's a lot of money. An extra bill for the company. Companies don't really want to pay that extra bill. I said, the people that we're bringing on in that you need and want to have, they're going to be paid good salaries, and they're going to pay good taxes. And people who are paid good salaries and pay good taxes, the reason why they pay taxes is to get services. And one of the services these people need is a place for their kids to go to school that will work. So anyway, I had Mr. Gretton's support, and the Chamber of Deputies was kind enough to pass a law that provided for subsidized tuition at the private schools, which now applies not only to the English-speaking private schools, but also applies to the French lycée. So I'm very proud of that law, and I'm very proud that we played a part in going ahead and doing it. Now, I've also been on the board of directors for several years for St. George's, the English-speaking private school, which has an English-speaking curriculum, which now also has grown in size and is brilliant, and has benefited from subsidies, building subsidies from the government of Luxembourg to build the campus, that they have, just like ISL. Part of the campus has been built with money from the Luxembourg government, as well as tuition support for the parents. But still, the tuition cost is getting pretty high. And one of my agenda items now is encouraging the Luxembourg government to raise the subsidy that they're giving to the parents who are at the ISL and at St. George's and also the Lycée. Mm-hmm. I also am pleased to notice that the Luxembourg government now is creating international schools that are primarily English language. Michel Lucius and Kirchberg is a very good school. I understand that the one in Junglinster is also a good school. And they're building one, which I think is up and operating down by the Moselle. And there's another one that's in Diekirch. So the government is starting to build international schools now. And I think that that's a good mix. Now, if you have more senior people, they have a certain standard of quality and they're trying to get their kids ready to go to university and everything. I think we need to continue to be supporting the ISL and St. George's, which have a little bit more of a senior executive focus, not that they don't accept all students. So education and the cost of education, I believe, is something which is worth supporting. There's something else, too, besides, which is that Luxembourg, which I think you've noticed, doesn't really have any natural resources left. We dug up all the iron ore and used it. We don't have a lot of natural resources in Luxembourg, but we're a very successful, very prosperous country. And the reason why we're a very successful and prosperous country is because of the talent that we have in the country. Both talent of Luxembourgish people, and I have greatest respect for the multilingualism and the hard work and the innovation of Luxembourgish people, and also because 50% of the people who are living here now are foreigners who came here, who were really good foreigners that we recruited to come to Luxembourg to go ahead and work with their families. That's a good balance of people. But that's the major resource that Luxembourg has, is its international population and the strength of talent and skill and wisdom and education of the Luxembourgers. So I would like the government to put more money into investing in this key asset we have by helping people who are anybody in the population, if they want to go to school and to take courses that will improve their professional skills to help them make more money and be more successful, particularly if they choose to do it in their private time, then I think that those should be tax-deductible expenses.
Do you think the Luxembourg government sometimes underappreciates the international community, especially as you just pointed out, they're usually responsible for a big part of the GDP of the country? Do you think there could be sometimes more of an effort to, I think you mentioned that you were critical a few years ago about the referendum about international people not being able to participate in the national elections.
I was disappointed by the referendum.
Right. Yes.
I was disappointed. First off, when the referendum was done, I didn't see that the government really made a case for the international community. And the international community didn't make a case for itself because it was being polite. And I think the international community is extremely valuable for Luxembourg and an enormous asset. And it is true, everybody who sits in the Chamber of Deputies has a Luxembourgish passport. There is no foreigner in the Chamber of Deputies. Everybody has a Luxembourgish passport. Everybody who's there has been elected by other Luxembourgers. So it is perhaps naturally true at times that the members of the government and the Chamber of, I'm not going to say that they don't like and they don't appreciate us. Of course they do. But they don't necessarily see the world through our eyes. They miss the perspective of seeing things as we see them, because Luxembourg is a little bit different for us than it is for them. I don't want to say that as a criticism, But I will say that I think it would be good, we're here on a voluntary basis. We came with our feet. We also can leave with our feet. We're happy to be here and we're valuable to the country. And I think we are huge assets to the country. And I don't want to say that we should be treated better, but I'd like it if somehow, I think sometimes that just in the ebb and flow of things, maybe our point of view is missing from the dialogue and discussion. And maybe the decisions would be better if somehow there was a way that our feedback and our needs and aspirations and wishes could be a little bit better concluded.
So, in a nutshell, you would like to be more involved in the decision processes on a
At a
national
certain
level.
point in time, I tried to do that because there was one point in my career that I was elected, that I found out that there was a Conseil National des Étrangers, and a Council of International People. And when I found out about that, and I checked into it a little bit and found out that it was a group and they were kind of elected, and well, they weren't originally elected. I think they were originally appointed, but the government was going to make them elected. And when they became elected, then, maybe they had some rights to go ahead and do stuff. So anyway, when I found out that, being kind of proactive as Americans a little bit are, I did a little bit more checking and found out that there was going to be an election. And I asked my board if I could put myself up as a candidate. And they said, yeah, go ahead. So I put myself up as elected and as a candidate. And I was elected to the National Council of Foreigners. And then again, continuing on being an enthusiastic guy as I am, I proposed myself as a candidate to be the president. And I was elected the president of the National Council. So I served as the president of the National Council for 4 years. That was a very interesting period of time. I also have to say that was a little bit of a tough assignment. The language of the National Council of Foreigners was French. Et si nécessaire, je parle français pas mal pour un vieux américain, mais mon français, ce n'est pas exactement parfait.
Ouais, non, mais je te comprends, c'est bien.
C'est
Oui,
functional,
ça va.
mais ce n'est pas exactement parfait.
Ouais,
And here
ouais.
I am, I'm the president of the National Council of Foreigners, doing the best I can, running meetings in French. I think doing pretty well, and trying to create a cohesion and to pull everybody together, and finding out that there was a certain group of people who are very Portuguese and very focused on Portuguese community issues, and another group of people who were Francophone and very focused on the Francophone community and this, that, and the other thing. It was, I was trying to build a bigger tent. My pitch to the members of the CNE was to say, I said, we can each build our own cake to feed our own, and we should fight over how many pieces of rice we have in our individual rice bowls for our people, or we can combine all the rice together and all the ingredients together. And I guarantee you, if we build a big cake together, it will be a better cake for all of us. And if we combine all of our rice together, instead of counting the pieces of rice in my bowl and counting the pieces of rice in yours, and then asking you to give me 5 pieces of rice because you have 5 more pieces of rice than I do, if we can do it all together, collected together, I think we can build a bigger pot and do a better job. At the end of the day, I think we did that pretty well, but it was a tough fight. But getting back to the other thing, again, we are guests being in Luxembourg, and I have no problem with Luxembourgs being concerned about their identity and ensuring that Luxembourg stays Luxembourgish. So I don't want to take the country over, and I'm not trying to rule the world and I don't think my friends are either. But we do think that if there were better means and better vehicles, that we could be more inclusively included in the problem solving of the country and doing things within the country, that maybe that would be a good thing. There are some organizations that focus. There's FEDL, there's the Federation of Industry, there's the Bankers Association, ABBL, there's ALFI, and they're a bit international, and representative, and they allow companies and to participate in them. But they're maybe not quite as overtly international as maybe the American Chamber of Commerce is.
So I think you previously said that there are silos. So in a way, a little bit the some not all of the expat community, but maybe a big part, they live a little bit in silos and they can't really relate to the Luxembourgish side and vice versa. So how can you break up that silo? Because I agree with you. I don't think Luxembourg does this maliciously, but there might just be a cultural difference that needs to be bridged in that case.
Yeah, I think silos is a good way of doing it. And I have used in conversation that metaphor and said, we're living in silos. And, silos are great when you first come to Luxembourg.
Mm-hmm.
You come to Luxembourg, you come from your hometown, and now you're in Luxembourg. And then you happen to find an American silo, a French silo, a British silo.
Yeah, it's very human. You're drawn to your people. You
You're
go
drawn to
where
your
your people
people,
are.
and your
Yeah.
people speak your language, and they know where to go and get things done. When you first get to Luxembourg, being involved in the regional nationalist silo is a cool, extraordinarily useful thing to do, and I don't think we should do away with those silos. But at a certain point in time, you should say, well, it's a great silo. I really love this silo, and I really like being here on Saturday night for the big party. But Friday night? Maybe on Friday night, maybe I ought to get out and I ought to see what's going on in that other silo over there.
Right.
Or maybe we ought to talk to them and we ought to say, how about on Sunday, we all get together and we meet in the middle.
Right.
And in the middle, we have a party, and I'll bring our food, and you bring your food, and you bring your drinks, and we'll have a mixed band that plays both music, and let's do it together. Because bridging the silos is necessary. I really am firmly convinced we shouldn't do away with the silos. I think they're immensely valuable, including the Luxembourgish silo. I think all the silos are valuable. We should keep them. But people should become a little bit brave at a certain point in time and should be encouraged. So silos should encourage other people to come and visit, and people in the silos should be encouraged to go out and mix and mingle in the real world besides too. And then we can help bridge the gap. So, but again, over the years, the chamber, I've also gone to the Chamber of Deputies some time ago and said, hey, we have a problem with the work permits for accompanying spouses, that it's difficult for them to get jobs because technically you need to go back to your country of origin to get a job here so that you can get a work permit to go ahead and come here. That doesn't make sense. You're already here. We should put you to work. So we argued with the government and they changed the law so that accompanying spouses can piggyback on the work permits of their husbands. To me, that's a sane, sensible, practical thing. The Chamber of Deputies did it, and I'll admit that I'm the one who asked for it. But it was the right thing to do. So I'm not saying that the Chamber of Deputies isn't unappreciative, but they mostly look at things from a Luxembourgish point of view. Another good example for that right now is we're doing pension reform.
Right. Yeah, that's in news right now. Yeah.
And that's a big issue is pension reform. But the view of pension reform from the standpoint of an expat foreigner is totally different from the view of Luxembourg pension from the viewpoint of a Luxembourger. And I know we could spend the entire day talking about that. Just to make a quick example.
Okay.
Many of the Luxembourgers who come to Luxembourg come later in their career. And they don't come here thinking that they're going to stay forever. But then over time, they fall in love with the country and then they want to stay. Luxembourg law says Luxembourg pension system is extremely generous. It's probably the most generous in all of Europe and maybe all of the world. But you have to work for 40 years to get the full benefit of it. The majority of the expats who come here are never going to be here long enough by the time they reach age 65 to get 40 years worth of benefit. When I retired in Luxembourg, having taken my NATO pension rights and transferring them into the Luxembourg pension system, which was a good idea. So when I retired in Luxembourg, having been a fairly senior guy with a good salary, I didn't get a great pension because it was based on 17 years worth of contribution
In Luxembourg.
Which was combined NATO and the other. My Luxembourgish pension, being a fairly senior guy with decent salary and income, I will guarantee you it is not enough money for me to live in dignity in Luxembourg. Fortunately, I happen to have a military pension from the United States. Fortunately, I have other investments. And I'm also continuing to work. Now I'm 79 years of age, and I'm still sitting on a couple of boards, and I'm still working every day. So my circumstances are fine. But if I were trying to do that just on a Luxembourgish pension, I probably would have left the country because I wouldn't have had enough money to go ahead and live. So I would like, and I think many foreigners would like, and I think it would be a good thing if the law were changed so that if people on a purely voluntary basis wish to continue to work beyond the age of 65 because they don't have enough time in and they need more money and they want to make sure that they have a better retirement when they're finally compelled to stop working, but they can work now and they want to work, I think it would be hugely beneficial and very much appreciated and good for the system if they could defer the start of their retirement so they don't start it at 65, but because they still are able to continue to work and earn enough money to live on. But they want more put away for a rainy day when they finally can't work. So I would like it if the people in the system could continue to work beyond the age of 65 on a voluntary basis, delaying the start of their retirement so that they can do it at a later date. And I have written a letter. I've had 2 meetings with Madame Dupré, who is the head of Social Security, making that point. And I have written a letter to the Prime Minister making that point. And now I'm trying to get a hold of the committee in the Chamber of Deputies that's working on that to make that presentation. That won't take anything away from Luxembourgers who want to retire when they want to retire. It won't drain funds from the system, but it'll help 2 groups. The first group it'll help is people who have been working within the system but came to Luxembourg, foreigners who came later. It also might help some Luxembourger who went abroad for some reason or other and then came back later and again then finds himself not having enough work history in Luxembourg. So it could help that. The other group that it helps on top of that is women, because many women take a career break to raise children, which is wonderful for society and a great thing. But then nowadays, when women reach retirement, we have, unfortunately, an increasing divorce rate. And the women say now, oh, well, we get 36% lower retirement benefits than men do. Yeah, because to a certain degree, you voluntarily decided you were going to stop working to have children and to raise your children, which is great for society, but it was a voluntary choice. And Social Security is a contributory system. You get out what you put in. But if we could let women who continued on a voluntary basis to want to work beyond 65 on a part-time basis or a full-time basis, if they can go ahead and get a job and work, the foreigners who have been here who want to continue to work beyond the age 65, if we could let them contribute into the Social Security system, both groups, it would put more money into the system now when the system is saying it needs money. And it'll be deferring their payout date to a later point in time. It also will help them when they reach the later point in time because they get better benefits. But I'll stop there because I know you want to talk about other stuff.
If you have I know you don't have a crystal ball to look into the future, but do you think at some point that maybe these issues with being able to participate in elections will change and there will be a more direct access to decision making in Luxembourg? I think you're fighting the fight, and I know you're really the voice for the international community. So what do you think that's going to change in the future? There will be more participation.
Well, let me give you a little bit of a hybrid answer. So
Okay.
now I have Luxembourgish citizenship too.
Mm-hmm.
Having come to Luxembourg in 1992, I finally have Luxembourgish citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since I've been here, I have participated in communal elections. Every single one. Haven't missed a beat. And now I have dual citizenship and I can participate in the election for the Chamber of Deputies and the Prime Minister and everybody else. And I guarantee you I will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've paid my dues and proven my loyalty to Luxembourg, and I didn't ask for a free ride. I don't think that now, having earned the right to vote in Luxembourg, if there were a referendum that said that everybody who's in Luxembourg for more than 1 year should be allowed to vote, I wouldn't vote yes
Yeah,
because
that's understandable.
because
Yeah.
I think that it's fair for people to be expected to prove their loyalty to a certain degree and their commitment. And I also want to protect Luxembourg, which I more or less plan on living the rest of my life in. So, I'm a little bit sitting on the fence. I want to preserve Luxembourg and Luxembourg's way of life and to protect the broader Luxembourg community, which now I guess I'm part of.
Maybe you have an identity crisis. You don't know if you're Luxembourgish or American.
Yeah, maybe. So now I would like it a little bit easier for
Mm-hmm.
people to develop the right to vote. Maybe this is totally selfish, but I don't think you should have I would be opposed. Probably a terrible thing to say, and if someone criticizes me, I would well understand. I sort of think if for foreigners who come here and they're wanting to have the right to vote and contribute, they should be net positive contributors, meaning they're working and they have a salary, not that they're here getting social support. I don't think asylum seekers and refugees who are in the country should be granted the right to vote because I don't think they're making enough of a. So, but if we can give the right to vote to people who've been here for some time and are making a contribution to the country and are net positive contributors into the system, then maybe they're starting to earn their right of participation somehow. That's a soft answer because I haven't got that all figured out. But
Let me pivot just to the broader picture here. So, because the relationship between the U.S. and Luxembourg. So, right now, I think it's a little bit tainted, or looks at least like this, based on recent news. So, what is your perspective on where do we stand in the business relationship, social relationship between the U.S. and Luxembourg?
I think the news media that most of us see likes bad news. It's not good news to report, oh, 3 Boy Scouts saved a cat that was in a tree. That's not the news that gets reported. The stuff that gets your attention and is hysterical and is bad news, that's what gets reported. So, of course, we're reporting on bad news. I'm surprised when I sit in Luxembourg to read all the bad news about the United States. And when I get on a plane and go to America and get off the plane in America, it's a hell of a lot nicer place than I see that it's reported to be. Okay, that's my first point. So I do think that people need to dig a little bit sometimes to go ahead and find out the truth. And the published news isn't always the best place to go ahead and find out what's really going on. The second thing is that in the Federation of AmChams in Europe, we do a report every year on transatlantic trade between America and Europe. And we report on a macro level of Europe to America, and we report on a state level to a national level. And there are 7 AmChams in Europe that pay for that report. And my AmCham in Luxembourg is one of the 7 that funds that report, which is done as a study by professors at Johns Hopkins University every year. And I pay 1/7 of the bill for getting that report. If you look at that report, which is out now, it's about page 183 that you will see the one-page summary for Luxembourg. The one-page summary for Luxembourg says that American companies in Luxembourg are paying the salary every month for 26,450 people. That's a decent amount of salaries being paid by American companies. America happens to be the fourth largest trading partner of Luxembourg and the only top 10 trading partner that's not in the EU. That's a pretty solid relationship, too. Luxembourg companies that have affiliated organizations in the United States, subsidiaries or owned or whatever, are paying 46,800 salaries every single month in America. Luxembourg affiliated companies are paying more salaries in America than American companies are paying in Luxembourg. But still, both of them are making a decent contribution. And the bilateral trade between Luxembourg and the United States is positive and slightly skewed in the favor of Luxembourg. So there is zero trade imbalance between Luxembourg and the United States. There is no reason whatsoever for there to be trade problems between Luxembourg and the United States, unless on a purely bilateral basis. Now, if there is the EU thing, and at the EU level, there is a trade imbalance.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't we get a 20% baseline tariff like other countries in the EU from the US? Or at least from what I remember.
The last time I checked, that tariff was on hold while it's being discussed. So I'm not aware of people paying, and maybe I'm wrong, but for the moment, I'm not aware that Luxembourg is paying any tariffs, or there is a tariff consequence today.
Mm-hmm. No, I think there isn't, but it might go into effect at some point. I think in August or something was what was, I think, said today.
Yeah. So what President Trump is trying to do is the trading relationship between America and Europe is the biggest trading relationship on the planet and is hugely beneficial. It's extremely powerful. We will do an event on that the 12th of November at Deloitte. So anybody who wants to come with that, they can sign up on our website. Should be free to anybody in the public to come. But this huge trading relationship is very, very powerful. But there is an ongoing discussion between the EU and between the United States, because the United States says, but this country and that country are imposing trade barriers that make it impossible for American companies to compete. And that's not fair. America say, we're happy to have equality of trading barriers, but we don't want there to be unequal trading relationships. And if we have to use tariffs to make it fair, well, we'll use tariffs to go ahead and make it fair. Now, I hope with all my heart that they work that out so that we come to a settlement. I don't expect it'll be perfectly fair, but I hope we'll work it out so that everybody says, oh, well, that's good enough for now.
Mm-hmm. So you think that it's more of a negotiation tactic or leverage to accomplish what you just described, a better access or less regulation from Europe?
Yes. Simple answer is yeah. Simple answer is President Trump. The U.S. has been saying this for years, that the relationship balance is unfair and we need to make it more fair. And we're talking about it, but nothing ever gets done. So President Trump is a bull in a china closet, and he's prepared to break eggs in order to go ahead and see if he can shake things up. So look, the majority of Americans come from European grandparents or great-grandparents. We think of Europe as being family. Now, family sometimes is a little bit dysfunctional, but we think of Europe as being family. We love our European heritage and culture and religion and roots. But sometimes we think our little brother or our big brother or our crazy aunt is a little bit unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking for fairness in a dysfunctional family. But we don't want you to go away. And we remember that you're family. And if anybody picks on you too much, we'll come in and we'll help.
I mean, given your background in NATO, and I think you have a point when you say that, because I think that point was made from the US government before, that the US is always footing the bill or a big part of the bill, and other countries are not putting in their part. Do you think it might be also an effort to accomplish a more fair resource distribution, or which country is paying which part of the bill?
For the past couple of years, Luxembourg is a founding member of NATO and has been an effective member of NATO. And at a certain point in time, NATO decided that they wanted everybody to contribute 2%. The US, which is a huge country, has consistently contributed more than 2%, I will guarantee. The US has historically paid for, it's hard to go ahead and do this because we get access to bases and we're not paying rent for the base, but we do happen to have planes on that base and we're paying for the fuel and the salaries and everything else. It's kind of hard to balance it out. And it's true that America benefits from having basing locations and port access and everything else like that. And through NATO, they get access to that for free. So maybe it's a little bit hard to figure it out. Mm-hmm. But I'm of the opinion that at least my personal opinion is that the United States has paid more or less or slightly more than 50% of the NATO budget ever since NATO was founded. Well, that's been 80 years now. That's a long time. It made sense when NATO was first founded. Europe was in terrible shape at the end of the war, and America and Europe didn't want to be overrun by the Russians. Mm-hmm. So we created a defense alliance. And it made brilliant sense at the beginning of the time for the Americans to pay the biggest part of the bill because we were the ones who had the most functional government at the time and were in the best financial situation. So no American will begrudge the fact that in the beginning we paid the biggest part of the bill. But and we also came in with the Marshall Plan, and with the Marshall Plan, that's why Goodyear and DuPont and Guardian Industries and all of the American companies are originally here, is because of the Marshall Plan to help with the rebuilding of Europe. And that's why America is such a strong player in the Luxembourg economy, because we started out under the Marshall Plan. But we're happy to be here still. We didn't leave. We don't begrudge the Marshall Plan. It was the right thing to go ahead and do. But over the years, Luxembourg and other European countries have gotten more successful, and they have earned more money, and they've taken care of their citizens and everything else. But from a U.S. point of view, the U.S. feels that as Europe has become more prosperous, it has a little bit taken America for granted and hasn't fully contributed to the NATO bill. Mm-hmm. And they've been saying that for quite a number of years, but there's been talk, but it hasn't necessarily done. So at the end of this year, Luxembourg will finally reach the 2%, and I think that's great. Mm-hmm. And I'm very proud of my country of Luxembourg for going ahead and doing that. Mm-hmm. Maybe it took them a little bit longer than it should have, but I'm glad that they've done it.
We eventually got there.
And now we're talking about 5%.
Now we're talking about 5%. Okay.
Now we're talking about, so when they were just in The Hague, they were talking about raising the ante to 5%. And Luxembourg signed up to that and said, yeah. Everybody but Spain said, we agree that everybody should contribute 5%. And America and Donald Trump said, wow, that's great. We're really happy about that. But we want to see it happen.
Do you think the relationship is going to still be intact, or because there's fears that the Luxembourg or the Europe relationship to the US will be damaged at the end of the Trump administration? Do you think that's overblown based on what you said? I figure that might be your opinion.
I think that that's overblown. Donald Trump's great-grandfather came from Germany. Mm-hmm. His wife, Melania, his first wife came from the Czech Republic. His current wife came from Slovenia. Americans like Europe, but Americans are pretty simple creatures. Americans want to be respected, appreciated, and treated fairly. When Europeans, I'm not saying that President Trump is perfect, but, there are a lot of presidents and leaders who have been less than perfect. I'm a little bit of the thought that you can not like the guy, but you should respect the office. And America is a strong ally of Europe.
Absolutely.
And President Trump also has, a lot of it's on his watch. He's done a lot to go ahead and help Ukraine. Is he concerned about corruption in Ukraine? Yes. He thinks that Ukraine has a long history of corruption, and he wants money spent wisely and not to show up in Swiss bank accounts, and he pushes for that. But he still has given Patriot missile systems and everything else. And, the U.S. pushes Ukraine to do the right thing, but it still gives Ukraine an enormous amount of support, as do the European allies give Ukraine a lot of support. We all would like things, in a perfect world, we would like things to work out that Ukraine is fully restored to its original borders. And in a perfect world, it would be nice if Russians paid reparations, not only to Ukraine, but to the NATO countries, including America, that have supported. That would be in a perfect world. We all would like that. And we'd say, oh, yeah, okay, we agree. But we don't live in a perfect world. So we don't like to see Ukrainians killed. We don't like you see Ukrainian cities bombarded with rockets and other stuff like that. And we'd like the war to stop. We don't want the Russians to win. It's a delicate balance now of how we can work that out. I think most of our European allies feel exactly the same way. They don't want the Russians to win in Ukraine. And I think most Ukrainians don't want the Russians to win. And they want the bombing to stop, and they want people to stop being killed, and they want a lasting settlement that will work. But Russia seems to be a pretty dangerous place, and even when the war's over, I don't think everybody's going to say, oh, we want NATO to go away. And so long as we're not pushed out, we'll continue to stay. By the way, there's an Air Force base across the border in Spangdahlem. And at that Air Force base across the border, I'm on the Wing Commanders Council, and I'm the honorary commander of the maintenance group. So I spend a certain amount of time every month over at that air base at Spangdahlem. That base has 5,000 Americans stationed at that base with a fleet of planes to go ahead and defend the Grand Region and Europe. 5,000. There are 1,000 people in the Luxembourgish military, and there are 5,000 airmen at Spangdahlem Air Base. I guarantee you the budget for Spangdahlem Air Base is bigger than the defense budget of Luxembourg.
Probably, yeah.
I don't criticize anybody. I'm just saying America is defending Luxembourg in lots of ways, including just across the border in Germany, and defending the Benelux and the rest of Europe at the same time, too. And there are a lot of tanks and a lot of armored personnel carriers and a lot of helicopters all over Europe. I don't see the Americans going away. And at the end of the day, from my European friends, what I hear is, a European army? Well, if we have a European army, what's the language? Which language are we going to use for the European army?
Probably English.
Is it going to be French? Is it going to be German? What's the language for the European army? Where is the headquarters for the European army going to be? How many generals are we going to have? And which nationalities are they going to be? And all that is before anybody bought any bullets and any rifles and anything else. Come on. The goal, I think the best goal is, let's keep NATO strong and let's have a stronger European component in NATO that reinforces and strengthens the American component. And also, don't forget, we have our Canadian friends in there too. Canada is part of NATO, and they're an important part of it too. Let's make the alliance stronger together, not separately. Just like I believe we should make the transatlantic trading relationship stronger together, not try and fracture it. Who would benefit from having a fractured trading relationship between America and Europe? The Chinese and the Russians. And I don't think that's a good idea. And who would be the biggest beneficiary for fracturing NATO? It would be the Chinese and the Russians. And I don't think that's a good idea. Let's do both together.
I think I agree with you on the part that obviously historically the U.S. has always been our strongest ally. And, in general, I think it's important that we maintain that relationship. I might disagree with you on Trump, but, I think that's a topic for another day. I know that's always a very heated topic. So we leave that for another day.
If you ask me if Mr. Trump is perfect, I will say no.
Yeah, but I think that's a little bit of understatement, but people can disagree. People can disagree, so that's okay. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.